Hi, I'm Bert Shanowski, and welcome to a special edition of FPAC. And I'm here with Lee Gobble in the Gobble home on the fifth fairway of the Fairfield Golf and Country Club, which even a lot of people in Fairfield don't know. Lee is really not only the oldest golf club west of the Mississippi, but that's kind of like saying a lot. I usually say it's the oldest golf club in Iowa because that seems to be more sort of reasonable and more pertinent in terms of Iowa. But reminds me of sitting in the Butler cabin at Augusta, because you've got all this golf memorabilia, pictures of the old golf club and everything. How long have you lived here?
45 years.
And where did you live before you moved here?
It's over on South 6th Street, rented. This first home I owned.
Okay. So 45 years ago, and I think you told me this was probably the best house well, it's the only house you've ever bought. But how much did you pay for it 45 years ago?
It was the best $20,000 bargain at that time.
Wow. So, and were you a golfer at the time? Did you wanted to be sort of by the country club? Was there much of a neighborhood here, or were you like one of the early houses in this part of town?
The builder was a real golfer. He built here because he wanted to play 9 holes during his lunch hour.
Right.
And so, yes, I did a lot of golfing in the early days here.
So do you get many balls in your yard here?
Yeah, and I've had one through the window ricochet off that stone wall.
Oh, I bet. I know I've hit a few.
I picked it up and it said crow flight on it.
I've hit a few into Royce Huff's, right into his grill, but we won't go into that. Anyway, I wanted to ask you a little bit about certainly your perspective on kind of the history of Gobble clothiers, but maybe we should start out and talk about kind of your family history of when your ancestors really first moved to Fairfield, or really what you were telling me a little bit before is they first moved to Abingdon.
Well, great-grandfather here, this is a portrait done by his grandson. The people down in Virginia were hearing about the government encouraging people to move west.
Right.
And they sent a fellow up here horseback and he came back and reported, yes, it's what you're looking for. And it started a movement of 12 families, and he spent a year building his wagon. Imagine coming across here with no map, and maybe he had a compass, I don't know, but there were no road signs.
So he was coming from Virginia?
Yes.
What was his name?
Thomas Wilson Gobble.
Okay, so he was really the first of the Gobble family to head west. And was his destination Iowa, or
Well, first they were going to Missouri, and then they found out that was a slave state, and then they switched to Iowa.
Okay, and what year was that?
1853.
1853. So it was really in the early days of anybody living here in this part of Iowa and Fairfield. Is that right?
Indians were still around. Yes.
Indians. Close by, or
Fox and Sac, and
and
then there's lots of history around agency about Chief Wapello.
Oh, sure. So how close were they to right here in Fairfield?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. So why were they going to move from Virginia? Because
this was beginning on fertile soil, and you could buy for $1 an acre.
So land was cheap. That was a big motivation.
But of course,
homesteads.
$1 was a lot of money too.
Right. What type of, was he a farmer back in Virginia?
He was a cabinet maker.
Okay.
And
so how long had the family lived in Virginia, or how far back can you kind of recollect?
I have that down, but I can't recall, sorry.
Okay. Oh, that's fine. So anyway, your family, Thomas Wilson Gobble, he didn't first settle in Fairfield. They've settled out west of Packwood, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then did he first set up as a cabinet maker, or start farming?
As a farmer.
Okay.
And I said to my dad, what was he doing over here when at Packwood was this fine land, and I got that disgusted look I'd get every once in a while. He said Packwood was then black, and before they learned to tile the land, was worthless black gumbo. And his farm had the three vital things he needed: rolling land that drained itself,
Right.
timber, and a creek with fresh water, clean water in it.
Good. And then, what was was there a little bit of a settlement there, or was
Not yet.
Not yet.
But he would keep a bale of a keg of nails and a roll of wire, and people were always borrowing, so he decided the community needed a store, so he opened a store about 10 years later, 1853.
And what was the name of the store?
Gobble, T.W. Gobble.
And Company or something like
yeah.
that, right? And that was right in Abingdon.
Yes.
So he really started the first dry goods, probably.
Well, I'm not certain, but yes.
It was like a mini mart, it was really kind of the all-purpose store for the small community.
There got to be a dozen businesses of barber shop and a hotel and whatever that might have been, and a lodge and so on.
Okay, so the town of Abingdon was just kind of a prairie town, maybe 100 people, a couple hundred people settled in there.
Later on, there was a wagon that went to town to Fairfield every day to bring mail and take mail and make purchases for the community. And
Good.
a lot of times, people never got to town more than once a year. Or
I was reading the the Fairfield book,
yeah.
and they were talking about in those days, I think where people would come on 4th of July. And that was like the big celebration in Fairfield, because this was like the hub, and people would come for like a 2 or 3 day solid celebration. I think that's kind of probably what the people's experience. I think probably reason they had the big celebration is because they didn't come into town that much.
It continued on too. At Chautauqua was a week-long celebration.
Right.
And a lot of people that took their vacation that week.
So when did Chautauqua start, and how long did that last?
Well, it gets its name from Chautauqua, New York.
Sure.
And it started in the 20s. There was Billy Sunday, the great evangelist, had a tabernacle here over on the corner of 5th and Washington, and they dismantled it and moved it to Chautauqua Park. And they hooked onto the circuit that was going across the country.
Wasn't there a big outdoor arena or stadium there, and some cabins that people could rent?
It was mostly tents.
It was summertime. It was kind of a big summertime thing.
August.
So let's go back to the Gobble. So when did the Gobble family move from Abingdon to Fairfield?
At that time, if there were big families and there wasn't enough need for them all to stay at home on the farm.
Right.
So that's how county seats were established. Would be the girls would come to town and get jobs in homes, and men would get starts in clerking in a store, and then eventually may become a partner. And
right.
So it was 1890. Well, let me tell you, grandmother said to her husband in 1895, Bruce, that is my dad, will graduate from 8th grade, and we're going to, he was sort of like a dictation, we're going to move to Fairfield next year because Fairfield has a high school, a library, and church every Sunday.
Isn't that interesting? So they basically wanted to have a little bit more urban.
This was quite a vision in 1896, a lady with an 8th grade education.
Right. I looked at some of the population statistics on the county, and Jefferson County actually had the highest population in about 1890. But it wasn't necessarily Fairfield that was the big population. It was really a collection of small towns, and over a period of time, of course, certainly the farms were small because they used draft horses. It was before tractors, so I think that's probably why you had a lot more people farming at that time.
It was quite a lot later when Fairfield had more population in town than we had in the county, in the country. Farmers.
Right. So the Gobbles moved about 1896 to Fairfield proper.
Yes.
And Did they set up a similar type of business here?
No, my grandfather worked around in different places and then bought a store in 1999.
Uh-huh.
Was going out of business.
In 1899. And which store was that?
Well, it was on the north side of the square, and I can't. That memory's slipping right now. I can't remember what the name of the store was. Sorry.
Oh, not then, but it's on the north side of the square. It's just
it started out as
it's just east of the North Alley there, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, so that's like up above is where Bill Teeple's studio is, and down below, I think it's Perfect Inspirations. They've now got a
and
day
ready-made suits weren't big then, and they had the tailors were upstairs making the suits in the second and third floor.
Oh, I see. So they do custom suits.
Yeah.
People come in and get measured by a tailor, and they get a
Well,
suit.
that was the only source of suits in the earliest days.
So did people dress up, or was it population in Fairfield? Was it kind of gentrified where people would wear suits, or just on occasion, or was it mostly people wore work clothes at the time?
Well, I think it was dependent on your occupation. But I noticed in a lot of photographs, everybody always wore long sleeve shirts. They might roll them up a cuff or two.
Uh-huh.
And everybody wore hats.
Right. That was the style. So they started, that was the beginning of making the shift from the hardware business, from the cabinet business to the hardware business to really custom-made clothes.
Great-grandfather stayed on in Abington.
Okay.
And one son came here, and one went to Clinton, and one went to Muscatine.
Uh-huh. So the son that came here was your grandfather?
Yes.
Okay. And what was his name?
I'm named after him, Lee Taylor Gobble I.
Okay, and so you're Lee Gobble.
Some people think that T stands for turkey, but it really isn't. And Taylor is not Tailor.
Uh-huh. I noticed that walking in today. Your talk about the license plate on your car. It's Lee Turkey, right?
Well, the name Gobble seems to amuse people, and finally you catch on. Don't fight them, but join them.
Right.
So I made a big thing of it.
And I've noticed that you've got a few things around your house that have some turkey emblems on it. Mm-hmm. So that's
and
kind of
the
neat.
Garment bags and the sacks that we sent out had a big turkey on it with the Gobble.
So you really branded it. You made part of that family brand, and that's stuck. So that's great.
Family crest on my shirt and all that.
Oh, that's great. Mm-hmm. And then I was reading a little bit about your family history, and I know certainly Turkey Day was a big day in the Gobble household for more than one reason.
Yes.
But there was also another day that was really a big celebration in your family, and I believe it was October 9th.
That was the arrival of great-grandfather in Abington.
So they would celebrate that every year, right?
I remember going out there to a celebration, and they had a small carnival, the Ferris wheel and merry-go-round, and there was a ball game, and they were cooking meat in a great big kettle with a pitchfork, and I told my mother, I'm not eating here. And she assured me that the pitchfork was brand new and was very
clean. You don't want to have them pull it out of the barnyard and making soup out of it, right? Good. So
that is an important date in our family, October 9th. Thank you.
Yeah, no. So your grandfather started the store, and then did your father go into the same business or work for him?
And he succeeded him, and then I started as a Parsons student working there after school and so on.
When did you go to Parsons?
1933 to 1936.
It's really right in the middle of Depression, yeah?
Oh, wow. Tough days that lasted, all kinds of drought and...
Oh, not only economic depression, but drought, and really hard on the farmers. What was the population of Parsons at that time? About
300. And I was a little surprised the president called me in, and that was something to get a private conference with the president.
Uh-huh.
And he said, Mr. Gobble, there's just two things are you doing the college any good, and is the college doing you any good? And it was something about a curve, and I thought, well, I thought I knew every curve on campus, but it turned out he was talking about a grade curve or something.
Of course.
And he suggested that I go downtown to the family store and ask for a full-time job. So I was at Parsons 3 years and never got a diploma.
Well, that's not fair.
Well, it was better that I didn't get kicked out. I was asked to leave.
Uh-huh. Wow. So was it because you had the attention on the wrong curves?
Evidently.
Evidently.
But
all right. So so what was your first recollection of working in the store? Did you go help your father at an early age, or did you wait till you were through college, or?
well, as a boy, you could run around town. You didn't have to go home and tell your mother where I'm going there or anywhere. The whole town was your babysitter.
Uh-huh.
I remember in 5th grade, I would go up there after school, and fool around. And there would be salesmen who'd come from New York once a year, and they were duded out in a overcoat with a velvet collar and a big diamond stick bin and a Homburg hat. And
They'd come in probably on the train, huh?
yes, and he'd say, "Sonny, go get your father. I've got to catch that 4 o'clock to a tumble. I don't want to stay here all night."
So you did errands. So you started doing errands.
Well, my father, of course, was waiting on customers, and
right. These guys were waiting on your father,
so if he missed the 4 o'clock train, then he had to stay to catch the midnight train.
Uh-huh.
There were about 4 trains each way that stopped in Fairfield.
So, and at that time, well, even until probably 15 years ago, we had two train lines, the Rock Island and also the Burlington Northern, which was certainly a big advantage for Fairfield and for the historic sort of development growing up. But certainly we had there was good local train service to move from town to town.
And that, as you referred, that helped establish industry here. Because there were no truck lines, and that was how the supplies came in and the finished product was shipped.
Right. So what? And I want to talk about that in a minute, but let's ask a little bit about the Gobble family business. And I mean, it's especially in this, even in the last century, to have really your grandfather and your father and both you sort of operate the same business is probably not necessarily uncommon, but it's fairly rare. And what are the most important things that you learned from either your grandfather, and did you work with? Was your grandfather still working in the store while you worked there, or was he still in the business?
He was in the Iowa State Bank by then.
Okay.
As a cashier.
Okay. So
I like to tell people if they ask me if I'm a self-made man, I say, well, yes, if you don't count those 3 people ahead of me. Granddad, grandfather, and great-grandfather.
Sure, but it's just like part of the lineage, certainly, but that's important part
it's on-the-job training, overhearing and being taught this and that. You start out with menial jobs.
So when did the store move from the north side of the square to the west side?
That's when the depth of the Depression, and we were paying $225 a month rent, and we could move over to where Democratic Design just moved for $100 a month. And
so you could really cut your overhead.
That was the busy corner of town.
Still is.
And there weren't many lights on the north side of the square at that time.
Right.
In stores.
And you had a store, with 4 floors there?
Well, much later on, when Parsons grew, that's when that came about.
You kind of expanded.
In the 60s.
So Parsons grew, well, you said when you were going to school there in the early 30s, there was about 300 students there. When did you actually sort of take over the business? Was it...
well, when I came home from World War II in 1945, my father had written me that if I wanted to make that my livelihood, he would try to hang on until then. But he hung on another 30 years.
How did that work out, working with your father for
Well,
30 years?
he just said, "I'll go down the basement with the ice cash bibs," and that's where I want to settle. So
Oh, okay, that
that's
worked out.
where
So where were you in the war?
in Europe for 3.5 years,
Wow. So you were there for most of the campaign.
England and France.
Uh-huh.
And my dad wrote me one time, "Have you written and thanked your Latin teacher for flunking you?" And I thought, why would I owe that? When you flunked Latin and won, they put you in typing the next semester.
Oh, right.
And that was pretty unusual for some male to learn
To type, yeah.
type. And so when I got in the Army, they were interviewing me about what did you do in civilian life? And I said, well, I sold clothes. He says, well, we give them away here. Can you drive a truck? No, I never have. Can you type a little? That's good enough.
That's good enough. So
And so what my dad was referring to me, I got this cushy job in General Eisenhower's administrative office and supply office because I could type.
So did you ever see Eisenhower in there?
He was mostly in London, and I was out in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire. You know,
but you weren't on the battlefront. You were kind of more support, so that saved you. That saved you. So there's the Latin teacher. That's why your father's saying he saved your hide, probably.
But in this office where I was there were 20 generals.
Wow. So then Parsons College in the 30s was like 300. And then after the war, did the Parsons grow?
But it still had a fine faculty.
Uh-huh.
And many of them continued on after Parsons.
Parsons always during that time had a really pretty good reputation, didn't it?
Wonderful.
Yeah. And it was like a lot of colleges in Iowa, because Iowa has some really great private colleges, really a small town liberal arts college, and really created the stamp of the quality of life of Fairfield, because you had all those sort of it was partly intellectual, yeah.
It was comparable to Simpson and Central and Buena
Sure.
Vista and all of those in the same athletic conference.
Right. Let's go back to early days, because I know in the last couple of years we've given a lot of recognition to some of the really great entrepreneurial pioneers of Fairfield. First one, I think one of the greatest ones, and has left a huge stamp on this town, was William Loudon. What do you recall of William Loudon, or the sort of the Loudon family and the impact of Loudon on Fairfield?
Well, there were distinguished gentlemen, and William Loudon was one of them, and he kept Chautauqua alive. I remember he built a new stage when it was needed, and they had a wonderful office there with architects and draftsmen, and there were many people employed there. Just imagine the wife stayed home, and they were able to send their son or daughter off to college.
Right.
So it was a good salaried employees, as well as it was Fairfield's largest employer.
For sure it was. Yeah, in fact, I've heard that they were the biggest freight hauler on the Rock Island line.
No doubt.
No doubt.
And James Frederick Clark was a great pioneer in Fairfield, Dr. Clark, who built what we call the Frank Lloyd Wright House, on South Main. Right. It was really designed by a student of Frank Lloyd Wright.
It's the Prairie design, though, and it certainly has that look. And what did Dr. Clark really contribute besides building that house?
Oh, just about everything in Fairfield. Started the Rotary Club, started the Country Club.
So he's really one of the
charter member, I think, of the Elks Club. You just look back through that book of Fairfield, and there's a book written about him by Susan Fulton Welty.
Right.
About what a humorous and talented gentleman he was.
So he's really one of those great civic leaders, or what I call to organize all those endeavors. He's a great social entrepreneur.
And I remember he went to Europe one summer and took his car with him on a boat.
No kidding. That would have been incredible.
This was way back when not many people were making trips abroad.
So how about Attorney Wagon Works? Do you have any memory of them? Or
Well, one sad one was that the employees got $5 a week.
uh-huh.
And there was Ben Taylor would tell me stories. There was this one couple wanted to get married, and he said, we can't afford to. And she said to him, well, we could move in with your folks. And he said, no, they've already moved in with their folks. And that's what $5 a week did to you.
So they weren't much of an employer with many benefits.
Well, it was fine for those times.
Right.
And probably those people were living at home on an acreage or farm, and it was a second job.
How about A.K. Harper?
Oh, tremendous man. He used to come in to me and say, Mr. Gobble, do you have a tan gabardine suit, double-breasted with 2 pair of pants? And he was a real small man, about a size 35. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, we don't. And, about every year he would come like that. And I remember he drove a car that had notes pasted all over the dashboard about reminders of how to turn it on or how to do this or that as more gadgets appeared on cars. Great gentleman, and his grandson is carrying on in the same manner here now.
No, that he is. How about at that era? Is there any other great sort of examples of either business or entrepreneurship that stand out in your mind?
Well, next door to me was Shriner Johnson's drugstore, and Tilford Johnson was a neighbor at home and uptown, and I think he started self-service in stores. There was a space for customers and a space for the clerk behind the counter.
Right.
He shoved the counters back against the wall so that the clerk and the customer were side by side.
Oh, right.
And
that was a good idea.
he had a great reputation. If somebody asked for something today and he didn't have it, the next time they came, he did.
Uh-huh. How about you? What were the innovations that you possibly made in your business, or had to change in your business because obviously as Parsons College grew, probably it put demands on your business, or maybe styles changed?
Well, in the 1960s, we were getting college students from coast to coast. Millard Roberts had recruited them.
Right.
And one of them and I became quite friends, Jeff Detlinger, who's sells automobiles in San Francisco now and still a close friend, and I'm godfather to his son very proudly. He told me, Mr. Gobble, this Stetson hats and Oshkosh stuff has got to go, and you've got to get Gant shirts in here, and Corbin trousers, and this and that.
And Arrow, and yeah.
That Arrow's got to go now.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe we could combine both and still keep our old friends and have what the college students are wanting to.
And about what year was that?
1964 or 62. And he told me about Levi's, which you knew cowboys were wearing, but it was starting to be streetwear on the two coasts.
Right.
So I got a hold of the Levi representative and got him into our store. And I remember the biggest store in Iowa City, the owners happened to be passing through Fairfield, and they saw in our basement Levi's, and they said to me, Lee, might be okay for you, but we'd never want any. And so we were the first with Levi's in Iowa, and we were the biggest Gant dealer in Iowa because of the Parsons enrollment.
And really the 60s were when Parsons College really grew, and Millard Roberts was the president of Parsons and part of that go-go area. Tell us, for people who haven't heard a little bit of that period of time, what happened to Parsons College and what impact Millard Roberts had on the university.
It was said the next president will probably be the last president because they're in such bad financial condition. And several people were turned down the job, and finally a Parsons alum was living in New York City, told him about Millard Roberts, who was a minister and fundraiser in Brick Presbyterian Church in New York City. And he was finally hired, and he had an inauguration here that we couldn't believe. He hired a Kansas City firm. Here's a broke small college that's spending all this money. And there were more dignitaries coming to town for this inauguration, and college students were opening doors for everybody, and every college in Iowa and many across the country sent as a representative here. And Millard Roberts had a connection. He heard about a gentleman who was advising where to send your daughter or son to college. And he hooked up with this gentleman, and I heard that he paid him $100 for every student that he sent here.
Oh, I see.
And the enrollment grew just as fast as you could build dorms, and Hotel Turner was purchased for a dorm for that reason, waiting for another dorm to be built.
Uh-huh. And so he came in, about 1963?
He was here 12 years, 1955 to 1967.
Oh, 55 years. So what was the enrollment of Parsons when he came in 55?
300.
Oh, it was still 300. So it was really a pretty small school for all those years. But in the 60s,
it would get up to 500 at different times.
Right. And then what would it peak? What were some of the peak years in the 60s then?
Well, 66 and 67, we had the best football team in Iowa. They could have beat the Hawkeyes or the Cyclones.
No kidding.
And the eight had pro tryouts and so on. It was one of his ego things to
have a good football team.
Somebody said in a group together, "Where are you from?" "I go to Notre Dame, I go to Michigan," this and that. And he said, "Parsons, never heard of it." And Miller says, "That'll never happen again."
Mm-hmm. So the Parsons College in those 60s with all the students, did they become more profitable?
Well, he was like the government, was always spending next year's money.
Oh, okay. So he was always like a year behind.
Yeah.
As soon as that new tuition would come in, he'd spend it and hold out.
And he borrowed $9 million from two insurance companies who eventually owned the college when it was sold to MUM.
Uh-huh. So let's talk about that, because that's kind of an interesting story in itself. So Millard Roberts was here from 55 to 67, but Parsons didn't close down until, what, 73?
Yes.
So was it in decline after Roberts left?
Millard Roberts was suing the North Central Accrediting Association that they had no reason to take away our accreditation, which was going to hurt the enrollment.
Right. Why were they taking away the accreditation?
Well, they claimed that his catalog was a selling tool and that this and that, but Parsons was really getting better every year, and there was jealousy among other institutions and the people who came in here to review for accreditation weren't people who took into consideration all the problems and needs of a growing institution like that.
Right. And it's usually the peers that usually come and do the accreditation.
Yeah.
So if there's a little bit of jealousy there, they certainly can influence that. So what year did they lose accreditation then?
Well, in 1967, they fired Millard Roberts because they didn't feel like his idea of suing the accrediting association was the way to go about it.
Right.
And I've heard this great story that, well, in fact, I was president, then a member of the board of trustees.
Mm-hmm.
A few checks later, and I became president after being asked to leave.
Right.
In a hotel in Chicago, we were having a trustee meeting, and when he was fired, and he left in a huff and went out and slammed the door, and a few minutes, he reappeared. He'd gone into the maid's closet and couldn't get out. So that was the last we saw of Millard Roberts.
Oh, that's interesting. So then in 73 they closed and the students had left, but I assume the enrollment had declined by that time anyway. But that's from the go-go years of the 60s when they had what, 3, 4, 5,000 students here?
5,000 going to 10.
5,000 going to 10. That's amazing.
And the town was full of motorcycles and
hot cars.
yes.
And probably that was good for your business, yeah?
Yeah, we were sending home about 2,000 statements a month to colleges. And one interesting thing was these fellows would come in and like the store, and I'd have them call up their parents to get approval for a charge account.
Right.
I was on one phone and they were on another. And he said, Dad, I'd like to open an account here. He said, account, you've got 6 accounts now. What do you need one there for? Well, you haven't seen this place and so on. And so finally the father agreed, and I asked him, would you give me a little line about a limit of what we could charge? He said, this is a doctor from San Antonio, Texas, Mr. Gobble. If you can clean that kid up, I don't care what it costs.
Oh, good. So you cleaned him up.
Yeah, and
So I was reading about this. The store was open from 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, Monday through Friday. But on Saturdays it was open till midnight. Tell me about
well,
that.
that was before my time.
Uh-huh.
It was down to 10 p.m. When I was involved, and they would tell about farmers would visit out on the corner until they saw they were about closing time, and then they'd start to trade.
Oh, I see.
Of course, that was an exaggeration. Farmers were very welcome.
Uh-huh. But also I've heard in those days that even your store made it, or you made it into Life magazine. Is that true? Or was it part of the Parsons College story?
Well, there were great parties, and some of these fellows who'd been to another college and came here didn't want to go into a fraternity, so they had independent organizations like WTBA, where the boys are, and they would rent a farm home, and that's where the parties would be. And I remember one of the cameramen from Life magazine was attending one of the parties, and he dropped his camera in the punch bowl, and so he was having a good time too.
How about there was some talk that a lot of college kids like to hang out at your place, and there was something down in the basement there that was kind of special.
Well, I think everybody, when they're out of town or away from school, needs a home away from home.
Yeah.
And no one has ever felt that they had to make a purchase. And many times it'd be somebody come in on Friday night. Lee, there's a big party tonight, and I got to have a costume. Can I go up in the attic? And so they made themselves at home.
Uh-huh.
That wasn't retail or display place. That was just storage.
Oh, I see. All right. So then let's talk a little bit about the transition, because certainly in 1973, it was kind of a vacuum here in Fairfield, because here all of a sudden you had 5,000 students, 5 or 6, maybe 10 years earlier.
Yeah, it dropped to 900, I think, when the Parsons closed. 900,
but even that's quite a drop. And then 73, what was the thinking at the time? Because
well, I remember that was a sad day when Everett Hadley, who had been one of the, I don't know how many presidents we had in between Millard Roberts and the closing, maybe 3, and Everett Hadley was the last. And had he followed Roberts, I think he would have kept Parsons going. But he called an emergency meeting. He said, gentlemen, it was in May, and
you were still on the board of trustees.
Yes.
Okay.
We need $1 million to be able to open in September. I think I could raise that, but we need $5 million to continue after September, and there's no way to get that. And so I'm suggesting that we close this weekend, not have semester tests, nothing, so that there's no riot or anything happens. So everything peacefully went on, and that was the way. And there was no looting or anything.
Mm-hmm. Was that the end of the school year then?
Yes, that was in May.
May.
And so it closed up 3 weeks early.
So that was May of 73.
It was a very smart move on President Hadley's part.
Right. Okay. So then, what was the thinking? What were people thinking was going to happen to the university?
Got together and ideas about what the campus might be used for. And the high school wanted to buy the field house, and some church wanted to buy the chapel. But these insurance companies that owned the campus said, no, we're going to keep it intact. And so there were companies came in here and wanted to buy a dorm or this or that for a training school and so on, but those things were all turned down. And I was ashamed of what we allowed the campus to grow up in tall grass and everything. And
yeah, in 1 year, if you don't maintain it, it gets...
Well, it got mowed a time or two, but...
Yeah, but even still...
It was much longer than a year between the closing time and when you arrived. What year and month did you arrive?
I came in September of 74.
Well, then it was a year and 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the grass was still pretty high, because I remember here, it was one of the first things people did was go out and whack weeds and get out mowers, and everybody, as I recall, everybody in town chipped in.
Yes.
All the new students chipped in to...
Women were cleaning dorms and kitchens.
Oh, yeah.
And it was
it was a really great feeling, because the welcome mat was out for, hey, we're reopening the college.
It was a wonderful coming together, and they had a big picnic. The campus had a big picnic, invited everybody to come down. And,
right. And of course, everybody's curious, because they wanted to all check out these people.
Yeah.
Not only were they from California, but they practice transcendental meditation. So, how did they dress, and what did they look like? And
we wondered, will people be coming with beads and robes and on? And then it turned out to be just nice.
They mostly came with coats and ties, didn't they? That was kind of a surprise, and that was like pretty dressy for that time.
And we knew, of course, that from Santa Barbara, California, they had to be quite reputable people.
Yeah. So what was were you involved in sort of any of since you were in the trustees, or was the negotiations all with the insurance companies and people from MIU, and how did do you know how they got connected?
I don't recall, except I understood that the MUN had an opportunity then, MIU. There were 30-some empty campuses across the country that they had a choice of, and that this was either the best located or the best bargain, and it was about 25 acres for less than $2 million.
Right. Maybe it was the best bargain or something, or there was something about Fairfield.
And so it was great to hear that the campus was going to be occupied and the lights were going back on again.
Yeah, that was a great thing. So what do you think has contributed to, because I look at Fairfield, there's been a couple of golden ages of entrepreneurs here. We talked about the Loudons and the Harpers, and certainly the Gobble family is certainly a part of that on the retail trade side. And now over the last, say, 15, 20 years, we've got another golden age of new businesses starting. What do you think has been a big contribution in terms of the place or the people or the history in terms of all that?
Well, meditators purchased many buildings downtown.
Right.
And that took away, there'd been too much absentee ownership of these buildings, and they were starting up businesses. And Fairfield was starting to make a comeback again. And a little later on, we heard that there were 300 cottage industries. It might be 2 people or 10 people. And so there was much more going on in town than we had any idea.
Right.
in the way of businesses around Fairfield.
And some of them started to grow.
Somewhat.
Some of them started to grow.
Yes.
Yeah, some of those really small businesses started to expand. So,
And
that's
there
part of-
was Somebody Cares gift shop downtown that later became part of Radio Shack.
right.
And then this great grocery store. Everybody's.
Mm-hmm.
I just, when people come to visit, that's the first place I take them. I think it's just the most amazing place.
Yeah, they've really done well. Yeah.
And it has a great influence on Fairfield. Our diet it's rubbed off on us. We've become more healthy and.
Well, we'll go into everybody's in Hy-Vee, and we've got a lot more produce and fresh produce, organic produce.
We didn't have a flower shop in every store like we do now. That's another influence.
Yeah.
So subtle, like.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think Fairfield will look like in 5 or 10 years? Though, given what's happened in the last couple of years, and especially in terms of the growth of kind of like First Friday's Art Walk, a lot of local culture, certainly a lot of downtown sort of even retail activity, really right around the corner where really was always the hot spot where Gobble Closers was.
I think Fairfield downtown is going to eventually rival Pella, which we all admire. We've got many committees working here about cleaning up downtown Fairfield, and that building on the north side that's being sandblasted is just the beginning of many good things. And what a great summer this was in Fairfield of the walks and the programs on Saturday nights.
The live music and everything. Yeah.
The park was full of people, and there were band concerts on Tuesday. Great comeback.
Oh, yeah.
For Fairfield.
Well, what I think, my opinion is even 20, 30 years ago, especially on a weekend in Fairfield, there wasn't much going on.
No.
Now I tell people we're a town where there's really too much going on because you get so many choices. And people laugh at that, but it's like there's always 3 or 4 or 5 things that you can do, and a lot of conferences and things like that to attend.
And the Civic Center, of course, will add a lot to all of that.
Right. Plus, I hear there's this really important restoration going on at the courthouse and rebuilding the steeple. You want to say a few words on that?
It's nice, Bert, that you happen to bring that up. That all started when we had a storm through here in the 60s and blew off the steeple.
Right.
And the Board of Supervisors then said, forget it, board it up and forget about it. And my dad got after me, when are you going to get that back up there?
So he's the one that got after
you. And
you.
It took me a long time to get started, and then I let it drag on for 10 years. And after I started on my 85th birthday, don't buy me a tie or a card, give your donation to the steeple. And now we're only within $3,000 of the $50,000 goal, and we're going to make it, and the steeple will be going up real soon.
Isn't that great? Well, that would be a great testament to your commitment and your commitment to your father.
The cooperation in here of the town and the supervisors and everybody, and it's all built right here about Holmes, Shaws, and Voorhees have done everything, and it's just a great community project.
I had the Iowa Arts Council down here about a month ago when we took them out to see the bridge, the footbridge over the Burlington Northern on the Jefferson County Trails that Shaws and Voorhees had helped build, and Judy Bales had designed, all on the using the architecture of the William Loudon trusses in his barns and stuff, and the tiles the high school kids made that were...
Mark Schaefer's class.
He did just a fantastic job with the blueprints and things out of the catalog, and the people from the Arts Council thought it was one of the most beautiful things that they've ever seen.
I was recently visited that bridge, and it is amazing, and the people train crews that must have been going through here every week and see that progress and wonder what is going on here.
I'm just hoping that, all the people going on Amtrak and the California Zephyr, they,
Oh,
they
they-
make a note of, hey, that's really one of the most probably important things that they'll pass under going through that
Yes,
whole
sir.
trip west. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. This has really been a great time chatting with you and learning about you and the family history and really sort of measuring your impact on this community, both in terms of Parsons being really one of the great supporters of MIU when it first moved here, and it's certainly the great contribution you're making to the beautification of the Jefferson County Courthouse and certainly the steeple.
Well, Fairfield is my favorite thing to talk about, so I appreciate the opportunity. And we should add, I have a daughter in North Carolina who thought at one time she wanted to continue the store, but she's very much at home there now, and I'm finally a grandfather. And
Oh, congratulations.
thank you.
That's great. Well, anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
I
Barry.
really appreciate it.